Today I have a beautiful brisket from Lynn's Meats, and it is a Heritage Angus brisket, whole brisket. I like my briskets in competition to be a minimum of 17 pounds. 17 to 18 is great. This was cryovac. Another pro tip is I like to age my brisket. So once I buy the brisket, I age it in my refrigerator for at least 3 weeks. So we'll take this baby out of the cryovac. When you are shopping for a brisket, I have some key points that you're looking for. There are two muscles in your brisket. There is the point and the flat. The point is this big, thick piece of meat here, and the flat is the flat section. For competition, I look at the flat and I try to get it at least 1.5 inches to 2 inches. This is because this is where your slices are going to come from, and that's going to go into your turn-in box. This is the fat cap, and it's on this side. On the underside, when I look at a brisket like this one, I look for striations of fat, marbleization. I want heavy marbleization in that. Also the color, that it's kind of like a bright red. That's another good indicator it's a good piece of meat. Sometimes I'll lift a brisket up right from the center and it flops down. To me, that means it's going to be tender as well. So let's get to trimming this. Sharp knives, a must. I like to start with the underside of the brisket. There is a piece of skin, the silver skin, that is on top of the flat, and you have to be very careful removing this. And the reason why I remove it is to allow your dry rub to permeate the meat and get the flavors into it. So you want to always cut away from yourself and try to make smooth cuts because you don't want to get gouges into your meat. Sometimes it's easier if you lift it up with your hand and then move your knife down like this. It works for me. Another pro tip, if your meat is cold, it's a lot easier to do this. So I'm going to remove the silver skin very carefully. And this is going to take some time. It's meticulous work. Sometimes if you lift up the silver skin and move your knife along, you can remove it as well. Again, I put my hand underneath and I can get better leverage on it. Nice smooth cuts. Once you remove all that silver skin, then I go to the point side. There is a big fat, almost feels like a baseball right in there. I try to remove that as much as possible. Now I could go in with the point of my knife and dig this whole thing out like some people do, but I think that's enough because again, the slices are going to come from the flat, and fat is flavor, so I kind of like to leave this in there. This is not going to be that important when it comes to your turn-ins. Also, I like to take care of all of the extra fat along the side. And these scraps, you can keep them. You can grind them up and you can make some nice hamburgers with it. Another important thing when trimming a competition brisket is to square it off, and that means cutting the edges straight like this. So when you go into a 9x9 box, it's going to be even on the edges. So I cut down the side, trimming all of the fat off. A lot of people, when they buy their briskets, they'll talk to you about buying choice or prime or wagyu. This is a heavy piece of meat and it's going to cost a lot of money. I feel like with this method, you can take a choice brisket and turn it into almost a wagyu tasting brisket. Again, I'm trying to cut this and trim it into a rectangular shape, and I'll show you that in a minute. Remember, these are not going to go to waste. We're going to save those. So you can see how I have it in a rectangular shape. Now I'm going to flip the brisket over to fat side up. If you hold your brisket up sideways, you can see how thick your fat cap is. I think it's super important to keep 1/4 inch on there. You can see it's thicker on this side, thinner on that side. So you have to be very careful, but I'm going to start with the thick side, again, cutting away. And I don't want to go all the way down to the meat. It helps me sometimes to lift this up and just follow it across. Got to leave a little fat on there to protect the meat and to give it some flavor. This is actually a very well trimmed brisket. I like to turn in burnt ends in my box, and that comes from the point. It has a lot of fat and marbleization that goes through it. I actually take this fat cap off of the point because I'm going to show you later how we remove it for those burnt ends. So about 2/3 of the way, I kind of score it a little bit just to make a point of reference. And this is where I'm going to start removing the fat. This you don't have to be so meticulous with. You are trying to get completely down to the meat. And this does not have to be perfect like the underside had to be. And I'll explain that later. Again, there's my point of reference, my little cut. And I get all the way down to the meat. It has enough fat inside this end that's going to protect it and keep the moisture in. So you got all that fat off. This does take some time. I'll be honest with you. When I trim a brisket, it probably takes me at least a half hour to 45 minutes. You are going to hit that. You're going to see this. I'm going to show this to you. This is the fat line that separates the point from the flat. So the flat runs all the way across here, and this is the part that we're going to use for burnt ends. Now the next step is I like to inject the meat. And I like to use Butcher's Barbecue, his beef injection. I just think it's fabulous. A lot of people use it and it works for them. Again, it helps with flavor and moisture because brisket is a tough meat to cook. I turn it over, and the reason I do this is because I want to inject, I don't want to have to go through that fat cap. And I also like to watch where my needle is going, because you can see the grain, it's running like this. And you don't want to see those injection spots when you slice it. And you're less apt to do that if you follow the lines.